Ladies and gentlemen, please join from our music industry and performance program, Ms. Vanessa Morgan, in our national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much, and if you could be seated. Once again, we are honored to be together for Remembrance Day, a day when we honor not war or the fighting of wars, but when we honor the young men and young women who gave their lives for the freedom of our country. We also honor today those who were caught up in war through no fault of their own, and whose communities were wiped out and whose families were wiped out by war. The poppy that you are all wearing is there because in the First World War, it was noticed that despite the destruction in no man's land, despite the number of shells, millions of shells that had landed, despite everything that had swept over the land, the poppies continued to grow. And it was the one flower, one plant that was always there during its time in the spring and the summer. And that's why the poppy is used as a remembrance. Today, across the country, is National Aboriginal Veterans Day, where our Indigenous Canadians get together and they celebrate their service and the service of Indigenous peoples in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and those who served now. And in honor of that, what I would like to do, first of all, is introduce you to one of our most famous Canadians, Tom Longboat. Tom Longboat was an Onondaga from the Six Nations Reserve who became the greatest runner in the world. In 1907, Tom Longboat won the Boston Marathon in a time that was 5 minutes faster than any time that had ever been run before. He then turned pro after the Olympics, where he and about 17 other competitors collapsed at the 1908 Games because of the heat. He turned professional and became the world professional champion as a runner. He held world records in the 32-kilometer race and in the 24-kilometer race. When the First World War broke out, Tom Longboat volunteered for the Canadian Expeditionary Force. His job with the Canadian Expeditionary Force was as a dispatch runner. And as we're going to find out a little bit later, it was the same job that one of our honored guests today did in the Second World War. In the First World War, it was without a motorcycle or without a car. When you were a dispatch runner, you ran. And it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the trenches, because both sides knew when they spotted a dispatch runner that you had to stop that dispatch runner from making it to their destination. If you stopped the dispatch runner, you stopped the message from getting along. It was a dangerous occupation. Tom Longboat was wounded twice at Vimy and at Passchendaele in 1917, and he was declared dead twice by the press back at home, which came as a great surprise to his family when he wrote them a letter saying, "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm fine." When he came home, he retired from running and went to work for the City of Toronto in their Parks Department, where he became such a well-known figure that everybody flocked to see him on special events. And then he became a stamp. And there's nothing more famous that you can do, I think, in Canada in the olden days, back when people actually mailed letters, than be a stamp. So today we honor Tom Longboat and all of the Indigenous peoples for their contribution to our country. I would now like to call on Ms. Julie DeBrusen, who is our Member of Parliament, to come and bring greetings from the federal government.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm waiting to hear the stories from people who have taken the ultimate of commitments to actually serve our country, because that is where we learn the most. And I was just asked earlier today about my own family's personal history. I'm first generation Canadian, so I do not have family members who have served as part of the Canadian military, but I did have family in Europe. And one of the things, and as a Jewish Canadian, I'll also say that I hold very dear is the acknowledgement that Canadian soldiers stepped up at a very difficult time and when it was so needed, and changed the course of the Second World War. And that is something that I personally, and I know that my family is ever grateful for. And then the other part of that is that we have right now soldiers serving around the world, and we can't forget the continuing service and how we make sure that we look after them when they come back to Canada, because that is an ongoing obligation on our part that we need to do and to keep doing better, quite frankly. And how do we prevent the circumstances where we need to send people abroad to serve in wars? Because that's where the heavy lifting must go. And on a day like today, and on the 11th, when we gather and we think about all of the women and men who have served our country, it's about thanking them, making the renewed commitment to how we continue to support them, but also how do we make sure that we work as a country to create the circumstances, not only in our own country, but around the world, that we do not require people to make that sacrifice and leave their families to actually go to war and to take peacekeeping roles around the world. So on all of those steps, I want to extend my gratitude and thankfulness to everyone who has served, everyone who is serving now, and to make the commitment and renew my commitment to continue to not only work for them, but to continue to work for circumstances where we don't have to send people away. Thank you.
And now with greetings from the school, would you please welcome Nate Horowitz, our dean here at the Story Arts Center.
Thank you. Welcome guests, honored guests, veterans, soldiers. Welcome students, faculty, staff, and also members of the executive team of Centennial College. For us, this is a very important moment at Centennial College, and particularly in our campus. We have done this proudly for many years. It is a critical time in the world, and it's time to remember, understand, and learn from this. So we not only see it as remembrance, but learning. And I hope we can learn today. There is a display that the museum and cultural management students have put on from the war, items, articles from the war. The alumni and coordinator are here to talk about that afterwards. So thank you for coming.
I would like to, in the spirit and understanding of recognizing that everybody here has some sort of a connection to what happened in our history in the bloody 20th century, I'd like to recognize two representatives who have come from our main campus, representing Dr. Craig Stevenson, who was unable to be here. Dr. Stevenson is our president. First of all, Rosanna Cavallaro is the vice president of marketing and communications. Her father was drafted into the Italian army when he was very young, and he became a cavalryman in the Second World War, and then he became a prisoner of war. And I'm fascinated by the story because I want to find out how her father wound up in a prison camp in Poland, and from which he was able to escape. And Ms. Cavallaro, if you would stand up on behalf of your father. I'd also like to recognize Lynn Ardizzi. Lynn is our Vice President of Human Resources and Organizational Development. Her father, Alan, was a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force as a pilot, and he tried to join when he was underage, and when he was standing in the lineup, Dad came by and wrecked it all by grabbing him by the arm and dragging him away. So he had to wait until he was of age, near the end of the war. And he was based in Labrador. And Lynn, if you would stand up on behalf of your father. Thank you. And now, we would like to read the land acknowledgement. And I've just realized I don't have it. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Erin. I'm a first-year student at Centennial College, and it's an honor to be reading this land acknowledgement. Centennial College is very proud to be part of a rich history of education in this province and in this city. We acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and we pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada as we work to strengthen ties with the communities we serve and build a future through learning and through our graduates. Today, the traditional meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work in those communities that have grown in the treaty lands of the Mississaugas. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people and accept our responsibility to honor all of those relations. We also acknowledge that today, November 8th, is National Aboriginal Veterans Day. The First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people of Canada have a long and proud tradition of military service, with an estimated 12,000 having served in the great conflicts of the 20th century. We are very proud to honor their service as part of the ceremonies today. Thank you.
All right, now we move along to the section where we are going to meet our veterans who've come to honor us today. The first of the veterans is somebody who's become a friend of mine. Bob Middleton served in the Royal Canadian Air Force in Bomber Command in 431 and 434 squadrons. 431 and 431 squadron was the Iroquois squadron. Bob flew Halifaxes and Lancasters as a navigator. He survived 10 missions on Halifaxes and 22 or 3, wasn't it? 23 missions on Lancasters. Bob is a wonderful guy, and those of you who get to talk with him afterwards, you'll love to spend time with Bob because he's a wonderful talker, and his memories are very, very sharp, and we appreciate him being here. To interview him, I'd like to introduce one of our students from the journalism program, Sam Cavanaugh.
Hello, Bob.
Sam, how are you? Oh, hey, that sounds great.
You're coming in loud and clear.
Yes.
So, Bob, I just want to go right into this. At the beginning of the war, 1940 for Canada, what was the feeling on the ground, at least amongst you and your peers?
I think everybody was shocked. We knew it was coming because the way Hitler was throwing his weight around. And there was a lot of guys that were waiting to go to fight for Canada. Oh, I have my own mic.
Yeah. So what was it that prompted you and your friends to enlist?
Oh, well, in my case, I was in my last year at high school, Danforth Tech. Pardon me. And in April, they graduated us. And they even gave me a job, or got a job for me, away in Heckengon out in the west end of the city. It took me an hour and a half to get there, and an hour and a half to get home. And the great bunch of guys in there, but the boss and I didn't get along too well. So after 5 or so weeks, I packed it in, and I went down, and I thought, you always wanted to fly? Now's your chance. So you sign on the dotted line, and you're in.
Can you tell me about the first time that you actually got into a Halifax?
The first time I got into a Halifax, well, it was a Mark V at heavy conversion unit, and that particular model wasn't one of the safest aircraft. It was famous for the controls locking up, and we had an occasion for that. And I thought, yippee, I'm going to get my Caterpillar. Actually, it's a silkworm. If you bail out of an aircraft to save your life, you are awarded a little gold silkworm. And I thought, great. So we were heading towards the North Sea, and you don't want to jump over water. So the pilot said, prepare to abandon aircraft, and we took the trap door out and we're ready to go. And unfortunately, he called base, and they said, try this and try that. He got some control back, and flew back to base, and he's coming in to land, and he's pulling back in the stick, and it's kind of locked up again. Well, we did something that should have killed us. When we hit pretty hard, and we bounced. We came down on the grass with the wings level. Don was that was my pilot. He was a great pilot. How he did it, I don't know. Normally, when that happens, the wing drops, and it's good night, nurse. So I don't know if I covered what you wanted.
Well, we certainly got a wonderful story out of that one. And when you were flying these planes, what was it that helped you get through? What was the mood on a mission?
Well, first of all, it was your job. And secondly, you volunteered. So how do you get out of that? How do you get out of that? You had a job to do, and I guess you got a bit of pride. I can do this. I'm a good navigator. We got a great crew, and it has to be done, and somebody has to do it, and you're it.
So there was really this sort of sense of camaraderie among the crew.
Oh, definitely. As a matter of fact, as I was saying to somebody many times, every crew in every bomber said they had the best crew in the Air Force. And that's what made it different. Like you got to depend on 6 other guys to do their job, so you're going to do your job. And we were good. Lucky, too.
Yeah.
Because I'm back here.
Exactly. And when you were flying on these missions,
Operations.
Operations, sorry. So during these operations, was there ever a time where you thought that this was it, that this is the last mission? Or
Yeah,
was every mission the last mission?
Yeah, there was only one time I got to the point where I thought, oh, I think we've had the course. And of course I couldn't find my parachute. And for those that aren't familiar, there's two types of parachutes. There's one where you see in the movies the pilots are walking to their aircraft and they got this big bundle banging them in the rear. That's their parachute, and they sit on it. Both the pilot and the rear gunner had that type of parachute. The rest of us had what we called the chest pack. And you had the full harness, but instead of a parachute attached, you had two snap rings. And you carried this parachute, the actual canopy, with you. It was about yay big. And you picked it up and you clipped it onto these snap rings if you could find it. So that was one of the problems. It would wander around the aircraft on its own, depending on how many maneuvers you were making. So, oh yeah, you get to the point you think, there's no way we're going to get out of this mess, but obviously we did, and here we are.
All right, so I was wondering if you could tell me when you actually flew your last operation in the Lancaster bomber.
The last operation?
What was the feeling of going on that last operation? Did you know it was going to be the end?
Oh yeah,
for you?
we did. We knew that was going to be our last trip. The one before that to Pforzheim, it was a night trip, and it was one of, well, I put in my logbook, best trip of the tour. The next one to Mainz, it was a complete and utter debacle. Everything was just crazy. The stream of bombers was all spread out. The leaders were about 5 miles to port, and it was a lousy attack. And in my logbook it says, worst trip of the tour. So the two of them back to back. Yeah, so I do remember that. And I remember we weren't supposed to have a camera, ho, ho, ho. Anyway, there was a guy right above us, about as high as the ceiling. And he had his bomb doors open, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to get pictures of the bombs falling away. But he chickened out, and he moved over, so I didn't get the picture. Probably just as well. It probably would have taken the wings off. But, you know, you're 21 years old. What the heck? You're having a ball. You know, that kind of answer is part of your question. It was exciting. Like, where else can you get to fly an airplane for free? And you see the countryside, not always under the best circumstances, because the other guys were firing back, and they were very good at what they did. Anyway, next.
Yeah, so I just wanted to wrap with one more question. And as somebody who lived through the momentous events of the 20th century during a great time of uncertainty, I wonder if you had any words you could share with us as we enter sort of another uncertain period.
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to be interviewed. I thought I would have to talk, which I'm doing. And I thought, what will I talk about? And it came to me that we need to buck our country up. Back in the 30s there, we were really attached to Great Britain, and there was a lot of feeling of the empire and all that, and you felt proud. And today I get the feeling that we really don't have that. So as the veterans get less and less and are able to tell this story, what are you going to have in the future? And what we have to do, people in journalism in particular, have to tell the general public what a great country we have. We have the best navigators, air crew, naval people, and army people. And without any one of them, we're not that great. But their story, it's unbelievable, the stories out there. You have the museums, all types, naval, Army, Air Force, that you can get the information. And I think that's what we have to do for this coming century. We have to build in a pride of country and patriotism. Like a lot of people criticize the Americans for their, loving the flag and singing their songs. What the heck's wrong with that? Why can't we do that? And that's what we should do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we got to be keen about the whole thing.
Well, Bob, thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your stories with us today.
You're very welcome, and I'm glad to do it because I think it's just what I said, it's important.
Thank you. Our next Second World War veteran is Max Dankner. Max Dankner is a military medal winner. He was a dispatch writer. Remember, we talked about Tom Longboat. He was a dispatch writer. Again, a very dangerous thing to do, as he's going to tell you, with the Royal Canadian Army. Max fought in Italy. And it was a very dangerous place, Italy. But it also, they fought their way up the west coast of Italy through Monte Cassino and, fought in the Liri Valley trying to get to Rome. But the thing that was interesting then about Italy is that it got very little attention compared to the Western, to France and what was going on there. And as a matter of fact, to the point that the boys that were getting ready to invade France on June 6, 1944, would refer to the people in Italy as the D-Day Dodgers, which was ridiculous, but there was a very famous book that was written about the Italian campaign by a Canadian writer called the D-Day Dodgers. And it was an incredible set of combats in Italy. Interviewing Max Dankner is Amanda De Silva of our journalism department.
Hello, Max Dankner.
Hi.
Can you tell us a bit about when you enrolled and why it was important to you?
Why important to enroll in the service? Well, I was going to school. I was in high school at the time, and I decided that the war was on at the time, actually, and I decided that I think it was time for me to go and join the Reserve Army, which I did for a year and a half. I was with the 6th Duke of Hussars in Montreal, and from there I went and I joined the active army. I went down to Beaver Hall Hill with my friend Jack, and he decided he wanted to be a pilot. And we went into this Air Force base on Bishop Street, and my friend Jack wore very thick glasses, and he decided in school that he wanted to be a fighter pilot. Anyway, we both went in, and I wanted to go to the Army, but he wanted to be in the Air Force. And as he got into the Air Force, we walked into this office, and the officer said to Jack, he said, "Jack, what would you like to do?" He says, "Well, I'd like to join the Air Force, and I want to be a pilot." I looked at him, and my friend Jack wore very thick glasses. Anyway, he said, "Okay," he says, "sit down here." And I was watching all this, and he says, "Take a look at the chart." And he says, "Put your hand over your right eye." And he put his hand over, he said, "Look at the chart." And my friend Jack said, "What chart?" I laughed it out. What chart? Anyway, that was the end of the Air Force. Anyway, we walked down the street on St. Catherine Street down to a place called Beaver Hall Hill, and that's where they had a recruiting station for the Army. And we both went in there, and I was accepted, and he was accepted. We were in the Army, and then we had to go to a place called Longueuil to get interrogated and get all examined and everything. Anyway, they accepted him, they accepted me as well. And from there, we went to a place called St. John's, Quebec, which I took my basic training. And from there I went, we both did the same, went to St. John. And from there we went to Farnham. We took our advanced training. And at my advanced training, I took what they call a DR course, a dispatch rider's course. And we did that. And from there, we went to a place called Debert, Nova Scotia. I'm giving you the whole rundown. From Debert, Nova Scotia, we went down to Halifax and got on a boat, and we went to England. And from England, we couldn't get into Southampton at the time. They had these big things. The Jerrys were coming down and bombing and all this type of thing, so we had to go up to a place called Greenock in Scotland. That's when we got off the Empress of Scotland boat, and we were stationed there for a while. And then from there, we went back to Southampton. After a little while later, we went to Southampton. We took a boat to Ile-de-France and went to Italy. And we landed in Naples, and that's when the whole story started, me being in the Army. And Jack he became in the Army Service Corps, and he became a sergeant in Sergeant's Mess or something. Anyway, that was the end of his story. And from there, we started. I got into the camp at Avellino, and I went into the tent, and the officer looked at me. He says to me, he looked over his glasses. I'll never forget. Looked over his glasses. How old are you? I says, 19, sir. He says, 19. I wasn't 19. First of all, when I joined, I changed my birth certificate from 1925 to 1924. So I was 18, I was only 19, and I told him I was 19. Anyway, he looked at me, he says, well, we're short of reinforcements, we're going to have to use you. So that was the end of that story. And then I got into this Princess Louise Dragoon Guards, which is an Ottawa reconnaissance outfit. And from there on, the rest is all history, going up to boot of Italy and having all kinds of aggravations and all kinds of problems. And there was lots of mud, lots of sleeping in the mud, and a lot of bully beef and hardtack and spam and all that type of thing. And it was quite an ordeal. And these Jerrys were very smart. They were on their way, sort of retreating slowly, but they always left rear guard action. And that made it very difficult for us. We had snipers all over the place, and it was a big problem. And just after Ortona, I happened to be laying on the ground, and a big piece of shrapnel caught me on the side, and that put me away for a little while. Actually, when I got the piece of shrapnel, this is quite an ordeal, and the medical orderly got off his little Jeep and got a hold of me, and he took a look at me, and blood was all pouring out of my side, and he gave me he took this thing out of, in our helmet we had an FDS, a field dressing thing, you see, and took this out, put it on there, and then he gave me a shot. And as he gave me a shot, everything blew up on me. They didn't know. Anyway, he put me on this little Jeep, and back of the Jeep took me to this FDS field dressing station, and we got into this tent, and everybody looked at me. I was all blown up like a balloon. They couldn't figure out what's wrong with me. Anyway, there was an Australian doctor in this tent, and he looked at him and said, this guy's allergic to sulfur, you see, and this what was the what. Anyway, they gave me another shot. That was the end of the story there. They sent me down, I was in the hospital there for a little while, and then they sent me down to a place called Salerno. It was a recovering place. You stood there for a while, and then the officer said to me, he says, well, I think, Max, you're going to go back home. He said, but I'll tell you what, let's stay for a little while and see what happens, see? So we stood for a little while, and here I wrote back to my mother, I'm going to come home, and everything's all right. And then he looked at me, he says, you know, you're not so bad. You know, I think we'll send you, stay another week or so in Salerno, back to the regiment, back to the Po River, up to the Po River in there. And that was it, and that's what happened. And that was my story. And from there we went down to a little place called Pisa, and there's a doctor, I just forget the name of the town. Anyway, we got onto a boat, and we got on these LSTs. We went to Marseille. got on at Marseille. They had a nice Norton motorcycle waiting for me. So that was it. So a convoy, we went all the way across France up into Belgium, and at that time the war was still on in Holland, and I was a DR all the way through in Holland, and that's where the war ended, up in Holland. That was it.
I was wondering, could you explain to us about your experience as being a dispatch rider and the training that you had to be prepared for it?
Okay. The training to be a dispatch rider, well, I was able to drive a motorcycle anyway before I joined the service, you see. But the training is very rigorous. It's a tough type of, you've got to go a lot of obstacle course. You got to learn how to fall off the bike, how to, and also they teach you, it works when you work in a convoy, for example. When we got off the boats at Marseille, we had the whole regiment, and we were a reconnaissance outfit, actually. We had a lot of heavy equipment, so it works like in a funeral. You stay at the back of the convoy. We had four dispatch riders. One guy runs up front to make sure that there's no crossing streets crossing over, you see? So you don't let the traffic, so the convoy keeps on going. And after the convoy is there, you get to the back of the convoy, and then the next DR gets up front and gets up front of the convoy, and that's the way it works. Like at a funeral, the same idea as a funeral, and that's it. But the experience driving in Holland, I was stationed in a town called Putten, and we had another squadron in Nunspeet, and we had another one in Nunspeet and Hardwick. And I had to take messages from Hardwick to Nunspeet and to Putten, and we used to do this at night. And these Germans were very, very smart. What they used to do is string copper wire across this, the narrow roads. And then what they could do, you see, and at night it's very difficult to use lights. You can't use lights on the motorcycle. So the towns weren't that far apart. They were about 12 or 13 miles apart, you see. So, but and this is what happened, and we lost two dispatch riders got killed doing that. They got cut across. See, what you're going with your bike and it cuts you across and fall off the. You just don't make it. That's it. Yeah. And that's what happened there. And that's it. And we ran, and then we came into a tar for down in southern Italy. I just forget, not in Italy, in Holland. We had there was in the stadium. They had a bunch of Germans that were caught taken prisoner of war, and we had to take them back to Germany after the war and stuff like that. That was the type of the war. I didn't have enough points to come home because I got into the war at the end of 42. But all these fellas that were in 1939, they had preference to go home first, which is only logic. So on tours after the war and that type of thing. And that's it. And that's about my whole little bit of a story.
I see. And yes. And thank you for your service, and thank you for everything you've done for our country.
During the Second World War, the Battle of the Atlantic was one of Canada's most proudest moments. Fighting the U-boat menace. Our Navy, when we started the war, basically was made up of a few ships here and there, some of them in Halifax, some of them out west. By the time the Second World War came to an end, thanks to the building especially of corvettes, which are little destroyers, to fight the U-boat menace, Canada had the 5th largest Navy in the world. Circumstances have changed now, and so our Navy is much smaller. And today I want to bring you from the modern forces, a man who basically has served on the entire Royal Canadian Navy at some point or another. Sub-Lieutenant Rod Carew is a Mustang. A Mustang is a very proud thing to be, and especially as the son of a lifetime non-commissioned officer, my father. I'm very proud to say that he started at the lowest of ranks and worked his way all the way up to being an officer. He has served, and then was commissioned after being a petty officer first class. He has served on HMCS St. John's, Ville de Quebec, Montreal, Charlottetown, Halifax, and Toronto. Total of 1,074 days at sea. Interviewing him is Monique Thompson from our undergrad program.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. Now, I just want to start off by asking you why you decided to join the Navy and if there was anybody who inspired you to join.
So I do come from a small town in Newfoundland, and like many Newfoundlanders, while we love where we're from, we want to see the world, and we're drawn to sea. I'm also from a pretty moderately involved military family. Like most people in this room, I had great uncles and I had relatives who served in the Second World War. I had two who were in the Navy in the Second World War, and they really inspired me. And I had two cousins who, in the early 90s, served in the First Gulf War. And when someone asked me why I wanted to join up, both to the veterans here on stage and to the folks in my family who served, the one thing that I observed as an outsider back then was that when someone says someone should do something, supposing that's when Hitler's advancing across Europe, or in the case of my cousins, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and the whole world saying someone should do something, people in uniform get to say, well, today I'm someone, and I can do something. And I really wanted to do that, so that's why I joined.
And could you tell us a little bit about your experiences during the Navy, what you had to do, your training?
Sure. So I'm as was introduced as, I'm a bit of an odd case. I started off as one occupation, and I had the great privilege to change over halfway through my career. So this morning we're discussing me as a sailor in the active fleet. Of course, I'm all rigged out today in a bunch of healthcare stuff because I'm currently a healthcare administration officer for the military. But I started in the fleet as a sailor. So ironically, I also went to St. Jean-sur-Richelieu for my boot camp, and then trained in Farnham, where I think you and I probably have dug the same hole and filled it back in again. Yeah, and after that, I went to Esquimalt, where again our fleet was back in World War II. I did my training. I was posted to Halifax. I had the great privilege of being posted to HMCS St. John's, which of course being a Newfoundlander means you're almost home all the time. After 9/11 happened, my ship was called to deploy to the Middle East. We spent over 6 months there doing counterterrorism operations, mostly maritime interdiction, where we were chasing down folks who decided to use the sea to escape from our forces in Afghanistan, especially lots of high-level money folks who were funding international terrorism. I finished that, came home, retrained, got promoted a couple times, went back to the Mediterranean in 2005, serving with NATO. Again, at this point, you think about how much geography a conflict covers, and you guys mentioned all the way from Italy to England and back again. Of course, by that case, lots of those folks had moved from the Middle East to North Africa. So at sea, we again interdicted and searched ships who were moving folks from North Africa into Europe, and again, terrorists, funders, supporters of international terrorism, trying to prevent those folks from getting to, not that in any way Europe is soft, but getting inside countries where they can do a lot of damage. After that, I returned back. I had the privilege of doing 2 winters, and of course my wife always will smile at me when I say 2 winters because I left her to a Halifax winter twice in a row in 2010, 2011, and went down to the Caribbean and helped our nation enforce counter-narcotics operations there. So one of the things that drug smugglers have in the world right now is money and assets. So a traditional law enforcement kind of boat or equipment doesn't make it, and it's not enough. So we send heavily armed frigates, with our sonar and our modern sensors to do things like chase down extended range aircraft that drug dealers use, or in some cases, we chase down what's called a narcotic submarine, where they've paid engineers to build and engineer a semi-submersible or submersible vessel to smuggle drugs into North America. So after that, I was posted to Toronto, spent some brief time here in staff work, and started my degree. I was lucky enough that, I mean, where else in the world can you say to your boss, hey, I'd like to take 2 years off work, I want you to pay me my full salary, and when I get back from school, I'd like you to promote me. And they shake your hand and tell you, good idea, go do it. So I did. I went back to York University here in Toronto, graduated with a degree in health management, and was commissioned as a healthcare administration officer. Since then, I was employed at our health services training center, teaching young doctors, nurses, and healthcare administrators like me how we fight and provide medicine in the field. And I have the great privilege today to be the adjutant, which is kind of like the senior staff officer, or senior administrative officer at the Canadian Forces Environmental Medicine Establishment here in Toronto. What we do there is probably some of the coolest science in the military. We have a human centrifuge. We do dive, flight, a little bit of space research to support military operations. The great privilege of working with pilots, Navy clearance divers, who are explosive experts and extreme divers. Every day I go to work and I pass someone in the hallway who thinks their job is very mundane, but when you ask them, of course, they're like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm inventing a better dive system. Oh, amazing. Or I'm trying to keep pilots conscious under high G. So again, I'm just a staff guy. As I tell my staff, I just pay the bills, but I get to work in an exciting place where we do military science. So that's my experience in the forces.
All right. And I read that you're in charge of the Canadian Forces Environmental Medicine Establishment at Downsview. What is the testing there like?
Well, I'm not quite in charge. I work for the CO. But our testing, so if you're a pilot or a diver, we'll do your medical screening. So we have a medical team who does all the kind of advanced dive med. For example, like parachuting. Lots of those things are really hard in the human body. So our medical folks are experts in that and make sure that the folks we're selecting are well suited to that kind of work, and also they're not going to get hurt doing it. We also do research. Currently, our teams are doing research on ejection seats and how we can safely get folks out of planes. They also do a lot of work on something that probably no one cared about in a Halifax bomber, but ergonomics. So we're worried about sustained operations and folks being in a seat for a long time and causing injury because of uncomfortable positions or the way they're sitting. So that's currently what we're up to.
Are there any health concerns for the department? Like, I know you mentioned something about malaria and pneumonia.
So one of the things we do, and it's funny because I was talking to a grade 6 class yesterday, and I expected kind of softball, normal questions. And of course, one young lady's like, I understand that anti-malarial drugs in the Canadian Forces are causing quite a problem. And of course, I smiled at her and said, well, thank you for the amazing question. Yes, the provision of medicine, and I'm new to it, so I'm still in awe of, much like yourself when you met that medic, I'm still in awe of the fact that when the whole world's in a fight, there are folks who put on a Red Cross and care about treating the injured. And of course, in the Canadian context, we don't even care about the side you're on. We just treat the person based on medical need. And that's a really proud part of being a medical person. Back to your question about how we give healthcare out. Yes, there's been some issue with our prescription of antimalarials and if it's caused harm to some of our troops. One of the things we're currently doing as a health services is examining was that a great decision? And if it wasn't, how do we make a better one in future? And of course, how to provide healthcare for the folks who we may or may not have caused any kind of side effects or harm to. So that is not what I do in health services. But of course, wearing this cap badge, you get asked. But that's part of what the health services does. Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shell to the front, please. Now, I'd like to explain what's going to happen now. Under the command of the Sergeant at Arms, the color guard will come to the front. We will have the last post. There will be 2 minutes of silence. Then there will be the rouse. And then after the rouse, we will have the reciting of the Act of Remembrance by Sheldon Reisler of our staff. Color guard, please.
Everybody please stand. Thank you. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Please be seated. Thank you. On May the 3rd, 1915, a Canadian surgeon by the name of Dr. John McCrae, exhausted, who had just buried his best friend in Flanders, left his dugout, pulled out a pencil and a piece of paper, and started to jot down some lines about how he felt at that moment. He had been awake for 3 to 4 days at that time, through the horrors of looking after the men who had been brought back from no man's land. And he was in the very front lines at the Second Battle of Ypres. He didn't like the poem very much, so he shoved it in his pocket and forgot about it. Somehow, fellow officers found the poem, loved it, and sent it off to the famous Punch magazine in London. On December 8th, 1915, Punch published the poem in Flanders Fields. It is said that when Dr. McCrae saw the poem in Punch and they showed it to him, he said, "Oh, that one?" But it has become the most important poem from the 20th century for British and Commonwealth forces, for Canadian forces, and for our remembrance of this day. Dr. McCrae died on January 28th, 1918, of pneumonia picked up in the trenches. But his memory and his poem live on. I would like you to please welcome to the front from our theater program, Ms. Anna Maria Markovich, who will read In Flanders Fields.
In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved, and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please stand again for God Save the Queen, which I will help you with. God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. God save our Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God God save our Queen. And please be seated. This brings us to the end of the Remembrance Day program. I would like to thank, first of all, Professor Ellen Besner, author of the book Double Threat about Canada's Jews in World War II, for all of the work that she did putting all of this together. We work as a team, and I thank her very much. I thank everybody who came representing our armed forces today, our special guests, and I thank the students who, with the interviews. I'd like to thank our broadcasting program for doing such a wonderful job of looking after our ceremony and putting up with the talent. And I would also then like to talk about, if I could, about Professor Phaedra Livingston, who runs the Museum and Cultural Management program. There is a display, as mentioned, of 1944 memory kits that you'll find over here. They were created for the 75th anniversary of the Small Arms Inspection Building, with the participation of Tess Ainsworth and Mariana Mesa Constero and Benedict Passaporte. We would like you, if you would, to take a few minutes and go and have a look at what they've done. Thank you for coming. And on behalf of my father, William Thomas Patrick Kelly, who was in the Rifle Brigade in the Second World War, and my mother, Nora Kelly, who was in the ATS. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.